The host of RN Breakfast, Patricia Karvelas, joins us now for a regular chat on mornings. Patricia, g'day. So NDIS spending is in the spotlight after last week's budget because there was all that concern about how much it's going to be costing over the coming decade and how it's going to blow out. It was one of the biggest growing areas of expenditure. But there are obviously people in the disability sector who are concerned that there's this discussion around this and the possibility of it being pared back. So where's all that at?
Yeah, so what we know is that it's the second fastest growing. Servicing actually our debt is the highest, fastest growing area in the budget. But the NDIS was expected to cost $25 billion a year. Now it's forecast, it's not there yet, to potentially get to $100 billion. It's obviously not what was predicted. And so there are, I think, reasonable questions about the cost and where the money is being spent. Where this is getting interesting is finding out some more of the detail. And this morning I interviewed Dr. Ben Gauntlet. He is the Disability Discrimination Commissioner and the Human Rights Commission. And he's been concerned that we're not having a conversation that is centring the people at the centre of the NDIS. Why do we even have such a scheme? Well, it's because we have Australians with disabilities who we want to empower fully in their lives to be able to participate equally. And he believes that that is an element being lost. And he also equally is putting the spotlight on the areas he does think there is issues in. Let's just hear him first before we get into some of those issues. Here he is.
It's become, for want of a better expression, an island in the oasis. And what we need to do is to be really clear to build a framework where there's a disability policy system which has different layers to it to support people in different ways. And in that way, the costs will be not necessarily reduced, but the expenditure will be as effective as possible. And what we want is effective expenditure.
Dr. Ben Gauntlet there, who is Australia's Disability Discrimination Commissioner. Now, the point he makes about some of this is that, you know, there is some price gouging going on. So we're talking about some providers, not all. He says there are good providers, basically basically charging really high rates for the service they are providing. But his point again is, while that's something that needs to be looked at, and he suggests it does get looked at, that actually individuals on the scheme, so people with disabilities in Australia, are not seeing that kind of benefit that's being talked about here, and that we need to keep that in perspective. So where does that leave us? Well, he does think there's fraud in the system. He says that we need to have a proportionate discussion about what the NDIS is offering people and also the benefits in terms of people's ability to fully participate in the economy and life, and that part's being missed. And I think he's right. We're not having that fuller conversation. And so he wants that to be the centre of the conversation.
Is keen to have this referendum within the next 3 years on an Indigenous voice to Parliament. Anthony Albanese is really keen to see this get up. It's one of his key passions. But is the push to get it through becoming a bit muddied?
Oh, I think it really is. And Marcia Langton, Professor Marcia Langton, who spoke last night to 7:30 and has been really a key architect and voice on The Voice, is calling for a bigger campaign and a education campaign, and also calling on a bit of heavy lifting more broadly to try and raise awareness of this. Look, there are concerns, Joe, that there is not enough being done if you look at the time frame. So if we're going to go to a general vote in a year, that is really soon. I mean, I know it feels far away, but it also isn't. And that is a big moment for the country to actually have a successful referendum in Australia, which we haven't done for a very long time. But to have a successful referendum, you don't just need a majority of the vote, you need a majority of the states as well. So the benchmark is high. And so even if public sentiment is broadly in favour of change, I don't know if enough Australians really understand what's being proposed. And so I think the intervention of Professor Marcia Langton at this time is really important. you cannot go to a vote that is potentially, people aren't ready for because you haven't done the adequate groundwork. Sure, Anthony Albanese is passionate. Sure, this government is. But I don't think the other elements have been lined up. And at the same time, we've had the Greens, I think, raise questions and muddy the water about their support. They say they're not against the voice, but they've certainly not been going out campaigning for it. So I see some issues on the left. That's my left side, yep. On the right, we still don't have a commitment at all from the coalition on whether they will vote yes or no, or whether they will go it alone, different MPs. And so uncertainty all there. Now, all of these elements, I think, have been probably distractions in terms of having a unifying voice. I suggested on Insiders, and you mentioned my appearance, but I mentioned that people should watch the Boyer lecture of Noel Pearson, where he really articulates the case for the voice, but also looks at some of the issues. And he talks about Aboriginal people in a way that I found very painful, actually, to listen to, as being a much unloved people in Australia and the history of discrimination. He says it's different to the same-sex marriage postal survey, where gay people were very well-loved members of the community, being members of families and known, and that in some families in Australia, lots actually, Aboriginal people are not centred. And I do think that's a big roadblock. I think he's right to identify it. I think that it's a different situation. And so unless you build a big education campaign, you might be condemning this big referendum to a no vote, which I think would be a really difficult moment for our country. So if the government's committed to it, and I think they really are, there needs to be a lot more work done in coming months.
Yeah, indeed. OK, we'll have to leave it there. Patricia Karvelas.
Thanks.